Okay, guys, only 15 questions to test your middle game and end game strategy. Now, the way that this is going to work is you're going to see the 15 questions in front of you. Try to pause the video and take as long as you need for each question. When you're done with question number 15, the next part of the video is going to be me going over the positions and telling you the answer. And I'm also going to tell you what lesson number I took it from. Guys, the only thing I'm going to ask before we start is that if you feel it's necessary, take notes of your answers. That way you don't forget. And ideally, if you really want to do this the right way, you want to help me out, take those notes on in the comments. Leave me a comment. Okay, this is what I think, and that way it's going to tell me what we should be doing next in this course. So with that said, here you have the questions. Take your time. See you in a bit. Okay, guys, so now that you took all the time you wanted, let's go over these 15 questions. I'm going to go really quickly over this. You know that I like to talk a lot and explain everything, but all of this we already covered it in a lesson. So I'm going to tell you the answer and the lesson number in case that you want to review it. Okay, so we have position number 1, guys. This is straight out of lesson number 52, one of the most important lessons in this course. So the idea here is to identify the outpost for our knight. And first, we're going to eliminate any black pieces that could control it. There are no pawns, that's why it's a weak square. So now the idea is to leave my opponent with a bad bishop that is blocked by their central pawns, and keep my knight to set it on in the center. So the moves are going to be bishop c4, queen takes e4, of course, and then bishop g5 to eliminate that knight. Guys, if something, I don't know, like this, then we take, and that knight is going to be in the center for a long time. Okay, so that's number 1. Let's go to number 2. Now, number 2, this is an endgame, one of the most popular and important rook endgames. This is the Lucena position. Now, the only thing I wanted to know, if you're new here, is that we have to cut off the king, guys. This applies to the Lucena, but it applies to so many other endgames. If your opponent's king is out of the equation, then things are going to be way easier. So you cannot forget to cut off the king. Then you continue with what we learned on lesson number 54, I believe. Now, with that said, let's go on to number 3. And by the way, guys, by the way, if you go to number 1 and I show you what the engine says, notice how, let me actually go back. Here, the engine is saying, of course, bishop takes e4. Look, you see it right there, followed by bishop g5. And then, of course, we put the knight on d5. Now, position number 3 is a little bit of the same thing. Here, I want to think of the endgame that I want to walk into. So basically, I identify my opponent has a pretty bad bishop blocked by these pawns. So I want to, remember, simplification, the rule of simplification is not only about what we're going to be capturing, but it is mainly about what's going to be left on the board. So as you can see, I want to leave my powerful knight on d4 versus my opponent's bad bishop. So the move that we're looking for is bishop b5 to make sure that that occurs, get rid of the knight, and then again I get a better position, an easier game after that. And guys, if you look at the engine here, if I go back, the engine is saying it's slightly better for white, and then you can see bishop b5 right there, followed by knight d4, right? So with that said, we go on to number 4, and this one is another endgame. Guys, here we have to apply the concept of the royal diagonal. So I want to, of course, as the white pieces, I want to go towards the pawn, but I need to be careful with this king getting over here and drawing the game. Now, I know that this doesn't make sense. It doesn't really matter if the king goes there, but the thing that many of you maybe missed is that if you go something like king c4, they could do a3, forcing you to take, and that becomes a rook's pawn. And we should know from lesson number 30 that all that they need to do is get the king to the promotion square. So what we do, guys, we apply the concept of the royal diagonal, which says that we could get to this square in the same amount of moves if we go straight, but also if we go using the royal diagonal. So this is going to be 1, 2, 3, but I could also do 1, 2, 3. Now, why do we want to do king c5? In case they do this, now my king is not going to be on c4, my king is going to be on c5. So now I'm just in time to take opposition and shoulder that king away, okay? Guys, many examples of this in the lessons that I'm referring as we go, okay? So next one is going to be number 5. This one, we had it on lesson number 60, something about prophylaxis. And the idea, guys, is that we want to play b5. Now, if you gave me here rook c1, well, you should get this one as well. You should take it as correct, right? But the move that we're looking for, the move that we talked about on that lesson about prophylaxis, is b5 with the idea to make it difficult for my opponent to develop the knight, okay? So that is the idea. Now, with that said, we're going now to number 6. And this one, we have talked about it so many times, guys. Not only on lessons that we've had on this kind of pawn structure, but when we learned the King's Indian defense, so many of the different variations, we had this pawn structure. So I've told you so many times, locked center, look at the pawn structure. For the black pieces, it is telling you should expand on the king side. For the white pieces, the pawn structure is telling you they should expand on the queen side. Now, what is the next step? Well, I want to target the pawn in front of our most forward pawn. So this is my most forward pawn. I need to target the pawn in front of it. And we should know this, we do it with f5. Now, again, if I show you the engine over here, you're going to see it's slightly better for black, and the move is actually pawn to f5. All right, so now we go to number 7. Guys, this one we had it on lesson 101. And if you already checked out my course on chess.com, I talked about it as well. So there's an isolated pawn on d5, and all that we have to do is, of course, control the square in front of it so that they cannot advance. We need to double up and put pressure with our rooks. We need to trade the knights, and finally put my bishop on f3 to put pressure on it. Now, don't forget, this is not everything. Once we get that, your opponent is going to be defending with your pieces as well. We need to apply the principle of the second weakness. Now, I didn't want you to mention that, but if you want to learn about it, go to lesson number 101. Okay, so this is number 8, and this one was just asking you guys, should we capture on e5 with the pawn, with the queen, or with the knight? Now, this one, if I show you, the engine recommends knight e5 is almost the same point or evaluation as pawn takes. But back on lesson 107, according to Karpov, and I would trust Karpov more than the engine, Karpov said d takes e5 is a way to go, because first we are fixing our pawn structure. Isolated pawn, I want to fix it. It's nice that it comes with a tempo on the knight, and it is giving me a good square for my knight as well, right? But more than that, guys, he continued to say, okay, now that my pawn is better, not only did I did that, but I'm also opening a rank. We talk so much about opening up files, but we rarely talk about opening up ranks. And when you open that rank, now my rooks and queen major pieces could attack that isolated pawn through that rank. Now, the other thing that he said is that since we have a light square bishop, it is nice that our pawns are on dark squares. It makes our bishop better because there's no pawn blocking it. But also, he said to follow this up, d takes e5, with the move pawn to g3. And the idea, guys, very nice strategic idea, is to supplement this bishop. We don't have a dark square bishop, but our pawns are controlling the dark square. So we're not really missing the dark squares. And by the way, typically, when you're missing one of the bishops, the queen is the one taking over those diagonals. Okay, so with that said, we go to number 9. And this one is a very important lesson, guys, lesson 111, about how to use the pair of bishops. Now, the plan here should be trying to create weak pawns for your opponent. The pair of bishops is not that effective unless we create targets, and those targets are isolated pawns. Now, the move that we're looking for here is pawn to c4. As you can see, if they take with the d pawn, well, we collect on e4. If they take with the b pawn, then my bishops start attacking those targets. Guys, to see the entire game that we covered, to learn about how to use the pair of bishops, go back to lesson 111. Now, number 10, this one is a little bit tougher. I'm almost confident that none of you got this one, guys, unless you remember lesson 117, I believe. So here, the main thing is my opponent is behind in development, and when that's the case, I want to do one of two things. Either attack their king because they're going to have less pieces to defend with, or in this case, the move is queen h4, trying to get rid of their only active piece. This queen is keeping things together, and by removing it, even at the expense or at the price of getting double pawns isolated, now they have no pieces to defend this pawn. So that's the move that we're looking for here, guys. Now, if I show you the engine is saying that queen h4 is definitely one of the top choices, but the engine also likes queen f3. So if you got queen f3, you should be happy. But the move that we were looking for was queen h4 with that idea. Position number 11. This one is very interesting, very important, because in this position we are down a pawn, but again we are ahead in development, and the plan is to continue to play energetically. Guys, this happens to me. Grandmasters, they sacrifice pawns, pieces to get this kind of advantage, right? Now, to me, the way it goes, I blunder a pawn and then I feel the need to justify it. So I know that I need to play energetically. And the move that we're looking for here is actually bishop b3. And if I show you the engine is recommending bishop b3 as the top move, right? So bishop b3, I open up the queen to defend the knight. But the cool thing about this move is that it's taking c2 away from the queen, and it is taking d1 away from the rook. Now, to see the entire game, to see how the black pieces took advantage of this, go ahead and visit this lesson that I'm putting somewhere here. So now, with that said, guys, let's go to number 12. And number 12, we went over recently, and the idea is very simple. My opponent doesn't have the dark square bishop, so I'm going to try to, instead of trading queens, I'm going to try to leave their king in the center, and I'm going to try to punish them through the dark square. So the move here is queen a3, as weird as it sounds, and then we continue to attack. So the king is not going to castle anytime soon, and we're going to try to punish them again for not having that dark square bishop. And of course, you can see the remaining of the game on lesson 140, I believe, or something like that. All right, so we got, what do we got? We got now 13, 14, and 15. Guys, number 13, this one we also went over it recently. We have a mobile pawn center. What should we do with it? Well, this is what we're looking for, guys. We had so many lessons on this. I think 79. We had the Greek gift. I think it's 78. And the move that we're looking for is e4, right? We're kicking this knight out, which is defending the king side. And now, look at my pawn structure, aiming at the king side. We continue from now on, bringing our pieces to attack on the king side. All right, so now we got number 14. And for number 14, this one is also from Karpov, lesson 107. And the plan is basically to improve this knight that is doing nothing here. It looks fine, but it doesn't have good squares. So now Karpov is saying, where do I want this knight? Well, I want it on the king side on f3. How do I get there? Well, if I think backwards, I have to be on d2 to get to f3, and then to get to d2, I need to be on b1. So the move is knight b1, and all of a sudden, I'm ready to go to f3, but I'm also ready to kick this knight out, which seems to be powerful, but since it's not on a weak square, I'm going to be able to kick it out. And guys, the same thing. If I show you the engine is saying the same thing. 1.68 if we did knight b1. Okay, and finally we have position number 15. And this one, it's a little bit tougher to find because we haven't really studied it in any of the lessons, but I trust, guys, your tactical side. And even though I wanted to make this more about strategy, well, you have to know a little bit of strategy, but you have to back it up with your calculation visualization skills. Now, the move here is after identifying your pawn majority 4 versus 3 on the queen side, you want to get your pawns in motion. When we talked about pass pawns, guys, we said we don't need 20 pawns. We just need one pass pawn to make it. So the move here is actually c5. And when the pawn takes, we go d6. And now the queen needs to get in the way, but you should know typically you want to block a pawn with pieces like a knight, maybe a bishop, but the queen is the worst piece to block a pawn, because now we get to attack it and that queen cannot ignore this attack, right? So they take d7. We're going to promote unless they do rook d8. Actually, even if they do rook d8, and then guys, ideally you'd have visualized all of these, but then after king f7, we got bishop c4, and that's the end of it. I know this one is a little bit was a little bit different than the rest, but it was important for me to include it over here. Guys, the only thing I need from you before you go is to let me know in the comments first if you are new to the channel, you landed on this video for the first time, or if you have been following this course in order, and of course let me know how many you got correct. If you're not in a hurry, let me know specifically what numbers you missed, because that's going to tell me what areas we should be focusing more as we continue with this course. Now, with that said, thanks for taking this exam. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.